Okay, it's in session. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We have a wonderful presentation today. I'd like to introduce you to Ronan Shay, is an assistant professor of communications and media management at Cabelli School of Business in Fordham University. He's a PhD from the University of Florida, and he's an assistant professor of communications and media management at Cabelli School of Business at Fordham University. Dr. Shay's research is focused on contemporary challenges in the field of media management, strategic communication, and technology diffusion. His research includes papers written on windowed distribution strategies, modeling return on investment for social media marketing, and the factors that affect mobile media device adoption amongst US audiences. He's published works, included articles in the International Journal of Media Management, Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly, the Handbook of Media Branding, Journal of Communication and Emergent Technologies, Games and Culture, Palabra Clave, I hope I said that right, the Handbook of Media Management and Business, and forthcoming Media Models Connecting Media to Markets. He's presented at a number of national conferences as well as international symposiums, including the University of Zurich Summit on Media Branding, the Sixth Media and Public Sphere of International Conference, and the World Media Economics. His industry experience includes projects in Canada at Rogers and North by Northeast and startup Random Sounds. So thank you and welcome to Ronan. Ronan, I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation and thank you for the warm introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. So I'm just going to share my screen now so you can see my PowerPoint slides. Just give me 1 second. All right. Can everybody see my slides? Just one more thumbs up. All right, so let's get started. What we're going to be talking about today is digital advertising, specifically in the era of all this big data that we're creating. Every moment, actually, we're creating more data. We don't even realize it right now. Our phones are on and our browser histories are generating more data. Our location is generating more data. And all of this information is being used by advertisers to sell to us more effectively. And that's something we're going to talk about today. And a big part of this talk towards the end of the talk is maybe how you can sort of control that data and only sort of share what you want to share instead of sort of sharing everything that's out there. And so let's start with why advertisers are interested in this information. And I'm actually going to use an example from offline advertising. And so before the pandemic, I used to work in Boston, but I live in Providence, Rhode Island. And I would take the train from Providence, Rhode Island to Boston once a day. And I was sitting on the train and a gentleman sat down next to me. He had the newspaper open and he says, oh, look at this sale on big screen TVs at Best Buy. This is like quite a deal. And I don't know if you've ever taken the train from Providence to Boston, but particularly in the morning, everybody's drinking their coffee and not really talking to each other. So this kind of stood out to me. And I thought for a second before answering, and I looked at him and I said, do you work at Best Buy? And so what was interesting is Best Buy was trying this offline marketing scheme called native advertising, where the gentleman was actually being paid to ride the train back and forth from Providence to Boston and back and read the newspaper about this big screen television sale and make mention of it to passengers. And hopefully that will, of course, generate more people going to the store and purchasing these televisions. And so his response was, well, I'm not supposed to answer that question. I said, okay, no problem, I got you. And so essentially what he was doing is called native advertising, where he was advertising in a way that does not appear like an advertisement. Now, this, of course, has existed for many, many years, and we'll talk a little bit about the history of it. But before we get to the history of these sort of hidden advertisements in everyday life, I want to talk a little bit about how it plays a role on the internet. And so I'll use CNN.com as an example. And so if you visit CNN.com, there's obviously news content, or at least we hope there's news content, mixed in with advertisements. And sometimes it's really easy to tell the difference between what's an advertisement and what's news content. But of course, the line is starting to blur. And so, I mean, the most obvious advertisement in the example I have on screen would, of course, be this banner at the top. And we're all familiar with Dr. Fauci, and he's sort of achieved celebrity status at this point. And so they're advertising some of his content there. Now, if we continue to navigate CNN and we move down, we start to notice that the advertisements aren't actually as direct as a banner ad like this. So if I just sort of move down a little bit on CNN.com, we see some more news content and what we hope is mostly useful information, when in actuality, a lot of this information is trying to sell you something, and they're maybe not being as direct about that as they should be. And so let's take a look at some of the advertisements here. And so you'll notice there's some that are still pretty obvious. So you have this video block on the side that my cursor is over, says sponsored video. And then you have this banner ad advertising Stanley Tucci's series on CNN. But then over here is really when we get back to this concept of native advertisements that don't really look like advertisements, because it says over here, get the #1 free fitness app. And it's placed within the news and buzz column. So one would think that this is a news content story about fitness apps that a CNN reporter decided to write, which is totally appropriate if that's what they decided to write about, but that's not actually the case. CNN is being paid to have this headline here and the corresponding news story when you click on it. And the only way you would know that is this very fine print here that it says content by Fit On. And so this starts to kind of show us just how pervasive advertising is mixed in to our regular day-to-day content. And so let's dig a little deeper on CNN.com. And of course, we have the obvious banner ad here. Then we have perhaps the less obvious, but still sort of clearly an advertisement here with bread. But then this section is really interesting because all of this looks like news information, right? It is formatted to appear as if it's journalism articles. There is no fine print as there was in the previous example. And the headlines are not identifying a sponsor. They're just saying different topics, Amazon's hiring, Samsung Galaxy performance, Valentine's Day, so on and so forth. And so if we actually take our cursor and click on one of the headlines here, we get to a subsection of CNN that's called CNN underscored, which isn't actually CNN. They want you to think that it's still CNN, news and information, but they have this really nice fine print at the top. And if we zoom in on that fine print, it actually says CNN underscored is your guide to everyday products and services that help you live a smarter, simpler, and more fulfilling life. The content is created by CNN underscored. CNN news staff is not involved. When you make a purchase, we do receive revenue for that purchase. And so essentially what you're seeing is an entire subsection of CNN.com is 100% advertisements. All of the content in CNN underscored is paid to be there. And it is presented as a news article. Here's a news article about winter jackets. Here's a news article about smartphones. But of course, they're actually trying to sell you those winter jackets and those smartphones. And so this, of course, is not limited to CNN. I know I was picking on CNN a little bit, but there's a lot of websites that are engaging in these activities, probably more than we would like to see. And so again, before we leave CNN underscored, I'll just mention that everything you're looking at in that subsection of CNN.com is an advertisement, but we should look at some different examples as well. So if we jump on over to Facebook, great way to keep in touch with family and friends, especially during COVID-19. If you look over on the right side, again, you have sort of the more obvious ad placements. It says sponsored. It's where one would expect an advertisement to be. But then this is actually my personal Facebook, and you can see my friend posted something about the Beatles. But what's interesting here is in my news feed, there is an advertisement for Vanity Fair. And I've never read, nor do I have a subscription to Vanity Fair, nor do I expect to see an advertisement when I'm looking up information that my friends have posted and content that my friends have posted, but there it is. Another example of a native advertisement, an ad that's sort of designed to appear to not look like an advertisement within my day-to-day content. And this, of course, goes beyond CNN and Facebook. We can go to Amazon. This is an example from Amazon.ca, but of course it carries over to Amazon.com as well. So when you're looking at your Amazon results, you would expect, if you put in dish soap, that everything you see are results, or what's known as organic results, based on what you searched for. Essentially, that Amazon is trying to show you the products that you searched for. In actuality, mixed into the organic results, or what you actually searched for, are advertisements for products related to the search term that you used. And so this first row here are just dish soaps. The second one is dish soaps. And then over here, these all four examples are advertisements by Cascade paid to be placed in the middle of the search results. And if I didn't know that, I might think, well, this is the best dish soap for my situation. But of course, that might not necessarily be the case. And the only way that you would know that it's paid for is this really tiny fine print that we can barely see here that says sponsored in tiny, tiny print right underneath the product. So essentially what I'm trying to say, and I've zoomed in here so you can see this fine print featured from our brand, sponsored. What I'm trying to get at is that native advertisements or hidden advertisements that appear to not be advertisements are actually very pervasive and very involved in our day-to-day lives, whether we realize it or not. Another example comes to us that's actually interactive. And this is where the internet really kind of took the idea of hidden advertisements to a new level, is making it that you can actually interact with the ad. So of course, online, it's very popular to have quizzes that ask you, what Harry Potter character are you? Or what superhero are you? And so this is a quiz from BuzzFeed about a show called Kim's Convenience. And then it asks you to identify different characters from Kim's Convenience. And so this just seems like fun internet content that BuzzFeed put together, just like other forms of entertainment. In actuality, BuzzFeed was paid by Kim's Convenience to promote the show and to essentially educate audiences on the different characters, because if you know who the different characters are, you might be more likely to watch the show. So just another example of an ad that doesn't appear to be an ad. And so now that we've really talked about how pervasive of an issue this is on the internet, I just want to go a little bit into the history. And I also want to take a pause for a second and just make sure that we're clear on what I mean by native advertising. And so essentially, it would be an ad content that matches the format of non-ad content or editorial content. And if we distinguish between the two, an advertisement is paid to be there. So CNN underscored, Vanity Fair on Facebook, Cascade on Amazon, they've paid to be placed there. The opposite would be editorial content, where a human being, a reporter, or an employee of Amazon or an employee of Facebook said, hey, you know what? People might find this interesting, so I'm going to put the content there. The goal of editorial content that's not being paid to be placed there is generally to inform or entertain. But of course, the goal of an advertisement is to sell. And we run into issues when we're blurring the lines between what is editorial content or something that's there to inform and entertain, and what is an ad or something that's there to sell something. So again, if we revisit this CNN example, we can start to see that it's actually quite difficult to determine what is sponsored content or paid to be on CNN.com and what is editorial content. Because what they've put here seems like a reporter could have just generated those ideas and wrote an article, because they don't really differentiate in appearance from the actual news articles. Forbes is also very famous for doing this, because they have articles that are news and information articles, and then they have articles like this that talks about employers' pension, which you'd think might be a news article, but in this case, it's actually Fidelity, which is, of course, retirement investment services company within the United States. They paid to place this article on Forbes so that you would read it and then potentially think about getting involved in their retirement and pension plans. The real thing to remember is that this isn't a new challenge that came out as a result of the internet. It just looks different than it used to. And so now I want to talk a little bit about the history of these hidden advertisements. The first known sort of hidden advertisement or native advertisement dates back to 1890. And at the time, they didn't call them native advertisements, they called them advertorials, where essentially an advertisement looked like a newspaper article or it looked like a magazine article, when in actuality, that was not the case. And so I just want to take you through a few famous examples. So we're not just picking on the internet, we're talking about advertising as a whole. And so here is an example from 1893. On the left side, you have some articles, Knew It All, Charlie Was Mum. On the right side, you have a big advertisement about clothing in Boston. And then here in the middle, you have what looks like an article, A Dangerous Diet, when in actuality, The Dangerous Diet is also an advertisement, just like the Boston One Price clothing house. It's just designed to appear like a newspaper article. And so as far as we know, this is one of the earliest documented examples that we actually have a picture of native advertising, or what it was called at the time was an advertorial. Another example comes to us courtesy of Cadillac, where in 1910, they bought a full page ad in the Saturday Evening Post to talk about how their brand views itself as a leader within the car industry. Instead of framing this to look like an advertisement, they actually made it look like a news article. So again, sometimes the audience was confused. Am I reading a news article that a reporter wrote about Cadillac, or did Cadillac write this article to try and sell more vehicles? And then one of my favorite examples comes to us courtesy of the Guinness Beer Company. In 1950, they released a magazine advertisement called Guinness Guide to Oysters. And the idea was to talk about different types of oysters and drink pairings that go well with those different types of oysters. Now, of course, the font is small here, so I'm not going to read it out. But if you actually take the time to read all of the different oyster examples, the recommended beverage to pair with the oysters is always Guinness beer. So even though they're presenting it as a guide to oysters, it is actually an advertisement trying to get you to drink Guinness beer, because of course, Guinness beer goes good with all different kinds of oysters. So we started with advertorials. That's where we really first had these hidden advertisements within our day-to-day activities and our day-to-day news and information content. And then we didn't just jump to native advertising. There was a step in the middle, and that step is product placement. And so as we moved as a society from newspaper and magazines to more television and film, advertisers evolved, and they were like, okay, well, we need to find ways to sort of put ads into film and television in an unobtrusive fashion or a hidden fashion. And so product placement is, as we all know, the placement of advertisements within television and film in an inconspicuous fashion. And I'll just take you through a few famous examples. So if you're a fan of Mr. Ed, the television show with the talking horse, you may not know that Studebaker was paying for a lot of the production of Mr. Ed, and every vehicle in Mr. Ed is a Studebaker. There is no other type of car within the entire series if you go through the entire series. And then, of course, the James Bond films are particularly famous for having product placement with the different vehicles that James Bond drives. Most recently, they were BMWs, but if we go back to 1967, there was a famous Toyota vehicle that was put in the James Bond film, and that really led to a surge in sales for Toyota. And then, of course, probably the most famous example here is of product placement in a film is the DeLorean in Back to the Future. And so, of course, this is the vehicle that the Doc and Michael J. Fox's character used to go back in time. And this really brought a lot of fame and attention to the DeLorean vehicle, which unfortunately didn't necessarily do fantastic in other areas, but they were famous for their appearance in this film. And so that brings us, now we're sort of caught up to what I was talking about at the beginning of the discussion, to native advertising on the internet. And so then the question becomes, well, what's the big deal? Like, why is it so different than the magazine and news articles, and why is it so different than product placement? The difference is that the internet is interactive, right? A newspaper or a magazine, the ad's there and you read it, but they can't learn anything from you because they can't communicate with you directly. Film and television, same thing. On the internet, however, they can actually use the advertisement to learn more about you to try and then sell to you better. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, how that works. And so in 2005, Google launched what's known as Google Analytics, which is a tracking service that essentially tracks whatever you click on. And this is not just available to large companies. This is actually available to any user who is interested in having it placed on their website. So if you had a website, at the end of this session, you can go to googleanalytics.com, you can copy and paste the code in, and then you can start to learn about what people are clicking on your website. The catch-22 of this free service, it sounds too good to be true, is that of course Google gets to see that information as well. And so Google offers the service for free, so then you can track what people are looking at on your website, but then of course they are also learning from your website as well. And then of course in 2009, the Facebook like button was introduced, probably the most hidden of all advertisements, because essentially we think that we're engaging in a conversation with family and friends and, hey, you know, this is fun, I like this, and I'm letting people know that I'm into what's going on in their lives. When in actuality, of course, Facebook is tracking all of the different things that people like. And then let's say I like a lot of Marvel superhero films. So then suddenly my Facebook ads are all for Marvel superhero films. And so another example of how online native ads actually allow the advertisers to try and sell to you better. And that's really the difference and the jump between product placement and these sort of internet native advertisements. And so something as innocuous as what children's book are you? And this is a very famous example because it came from Amazon. In 2014, Amazon paid BuzzFeed to make a quiz that asked audiences, what children's book are you? You fill out the quiz and then it tells you what children's book you are. And of course, they were trying to learn what types of children's books people like and then try to sell those people who completed the quiz the children's book. And so if you were, you know, Corduroy, at the end of the quiz, there was a link that said, do you want to buy a copy of Corduroy? What really made the difference here is that Amazon is such a huge company that by them engaging in this type of advertising in 2014, it essentially legitimized it for the rest of the industry. So smaller companies were like, well, if Amazon's doing it, then I can do it too. And so the real connection between your data and your advertisement is that essentially anything you click on, and that if you're using a touch device, what you tap on, that click is archived and analyzed, and then the advertisers try and sell to you better. And the way this affects hidden advertisements is that the hidden advertisements are becoming harder and harder to tell the difference because they're learning about your personality and then giving you ads that are more relevant to you and more relevant to you. And so then they become harder and harder to see and decipher between what's regular content and what's an advertisement. And so I'll just give you an example using Disney. So let's just say I watched The Lion King with my son on Disney Plus. And I used the same credit card information for Disney Plus as I did, for example, like my Facebook account. Suddenly, all my Facebook advertisements are going to look like Lion King products because they know that I watched The Lion King, therefore I must be into this product. The ultimate goal is that I'm eventually going to go to the Disney store and I'm going to buy my son a Lion King outfit or a Lion King toy or something like that, which I probably did end up doing. He's adorable and I can't resist, but he's 1 year old, by the way. But in any event, you know, this is the relationship that companies are hoping to achieve through these advertisements. And what's interesting is now they're trying to do it in reverse, where you actually buy a product, and then if you bought a product using the same credit card as you use for a website, they can link up that information because they, as Disney, know which credit card you're using for the Disney store and then which credit card you're using for Disney Plus, and can sort of figure out if it's the same person. And so if I did it in reverse and I bought a Lion King toy at the Disney store, they can then recommend that I watch The Lion King on Disney Plus, and they sort of keep me in their portfolio of products and services. So then the question really becomes, how can you control this relationship, right? I know it sounds very sort of dire that there's not anything that you can do and there's all this information out there and they're learning so much about you, but that's actually not true. There's a lot of power in the user's hands. And I want to talk a little bit about the different ways that you can sort of take control of the data you're sharing. I'm also going to mention why some people like to share the data, because there are some people who are okay with this relationship and they don't have an issue with it. And so, it's really up to you as an individual to sort of decide what your perspective is. And so if we look at this, where we have to sort of break the relationship or put a pause on the relationship, it's not stopping to use the internet, right? A lot of people are like, well, don't use the internet. Well, that's not realistic. And at the same time, it's not never see an advertisement, because that's probably not realistic either. What is realistic is breaking the archive and essentially preventing them from tracking the information that you're clicking on and you're looking at, which definitely is possible with a few easy steps. Before I go into those easy steps, I want you to think about whether you are in favor of blocking this information or whether you are in favor of sharing the information with companies. And I'm going to sort of talk about the benefits and the drawbacks. So if you like sharing the information and you're okay with Disney having this information about you, there are some positives. The advertisements that you do see will become more relevant. Your internet experience as a whole will be more customized, because Amazon will save, your search history and Google will save your search history. So everything will be more customized to you. Sometimes it's fun that if you have to see an advertisement, that it's better that it is a quiz and interactive. Arguably, these ads are less disruptive and more easy to use. So if you have to be advertised to, why not? And then if you're on the business side, why do they keep using this? Well, because it's effective and it's demonstrated that it shows an increase in sales. Now, of course, there's the counter argument, which is, why would you want to sort of take the reins back of your data and start controlling your data? Well, of course, hiding advertisements within news and information content can be confusing. It has the potential to weaken journalism because, of course, how do you know if something is an ad or a news article, right? You can pay for political advertising on Facebook that looks like a news article, but it's not. It's an ad. Somebody placed it there. And so there's this sort of weakening of journalism that's happening as a result of this relationship. A lot of this information implies that it's unbiased, but of course it is. There's also the potential for click fraud, which is essentially people putting up fake information in order to just make money off things that you click on. And it's a slippery slope from a privacy perspective, right? We're already giving so much information out there. Where does it stop? And how do we sort of regain control of the situation? And so these are five easy steps that anybody can take to sort of break the relationship that I was referring to, if you want to. If you like the relationship and you like sort of having a more customized internet experience, that's okay. But if you wanted to sort of break the relationship, the first thing you could do is opt out. A lot of people don't know this, but within the United States, if you use a website, it means that you tacitly agree to the terms and conditions, even if you didn't click I agree. So just by searching something in Google, you're agreeing to Google's terms and conditions. So one thing you could do is just not use that website. So that would be opting out. Of course, Google is just such a popular website, maybe it's not possible to do that. So then the next step would be control. So I am going to use Google, I'm not going to opt out, but I want to control what I'm sharing with them. A lot of people don't know this, but if you sign into your Google account and many different websites, because there is a requirement that websites do this, and there's increasing requirements, you can actually control what information you share with them and what information you don't. There's so many settings, it's very confusing if you go into it. So the easiest thing I could say is look for the box that says required cookies only. And that is essentially the lowest threshold of data sharing possible while still using that service. And so required cookies only is another option. Incognito mode is an option in a lot of popular browsers like Google Chrome and Safari, where you are searching the internet without any data tracking whatsoever. And so you just need to turn incognito mode on. It's funny because they probably could give us the browser with incognito mode on and you could choose to turn it off, but of course they don't want to do that because they want the information. Two other options are reducing your digital footprint. So when you're using the internet, just use what you need. Don't sort of wander around and end up in sort of bad internet neighborhoods on websites you're not familiar with. And then, of course, finally, there's media literacy, which is look at all of the content critically and ask yourself, is it possible that what I'm looking at is an ad? Just ask yourself that question just to double check as you're sort of navigating online. So in summary, native advertising has existed well before the internet, right? A lot of people say, oh, it's the internet's fault. Everything's the internet's fault. It's actually not true. It existed in magazines and in newspapers. It then moved into film and television with product placement. And now, of course, it has moved online with these sort of hidden search results on Google, on Amazon, in your Facebook newsfeed, in your CNN news article. Why is it different? And why is it sort of a bigger issue than it used to be? Because the internet is interactive. So then of course they can learn information about you and then advertise to you better, which then leads me to the sort of final point of this discussion, which is you need to decide for yourself what data you're comfortable sharing. And if you are pro native advertising, that's okay. And you're going to have this like customized internet experience. And for example, Amazon recommendations, Netflix recommendations, it's going to make it easier to navigate the giant balloon of content that is the internet. Alternatively, if you don't like this idea that I've been talking about today, then you can use the 5 steps that I talked about to sort of take back control of your data and only share what you want to share. But again, that's a very personal decision. And I'm not saying one option is better than the other. I'm just saying that people should decide where they stand on the issue, before using the internet in their day-to-day lives. So where are we going here in the future? Just a couple of closing thoughts. It's a very exciting industry. It's a very exciting topic to study because it's always changing. And so right now, the reception from government regulators and from audiences is that we're okay with native advertising, because the feedback from consumers has been, as a society, well, we enjoy the interactive ads more than the annoying pop-up ads and other things that are disruptive. And so we're okay with it. But it's a very precarious balance beam right now with consumer trust. And if consumers start to lose trust in these hidden advertisements, that's when you're going to start to see regulation, because the government will only act if a critical mass of Americans feel that there is an issue, which is not the case right now. What companies are trying to do is have the final piece of the puzzle, which is use your credit card information, not to buy things. I know it's like use your credit card information, they're going to buy everything. That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to use your credit card information to learn about you better, so they can sell to you better, because you use the same credit card in the grocery store as you do on Amazon.com, as you do on Disney+. And so my sort of thought here as we're closing the discussion, and then we're going to open it for question and answer, is are companies going to be able to do that without breaking consumer trust? And I'm not too sure about that. I think that that might be the linchpin where people draw the line and say, you know what, I was fine with you tracking what I clicked on, but now looking at my sort of credit card and where I'm spending money and then selling to me better because you have all of that information, that's too much for me. I don't know the answer because that's a very personal decision for every American consumer. I can just say that we should keep an eye on this, because that's really going to be the future of this type of advertising, if we're okay with that credit card information being used to sell to us better, or if that's sort of the line that breaks consumer trust. So I guess time will tell. I want to thank everybody for the invitation today. Obviously, this is a topic I'm very passionate about, and so I love coming and speaking to audiences who are interested in this topic. And of course, I'm available now for as long as you'd like to answer any questions and to have a discussion. And again, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate being here.
Okay, Ronan, thank you very much. Okay, so please start putting in your questions in the chat box. We have one already, and the first one is, what about ad blockers? Do they block these?
So that's a really good question. An ad blocker can only catch an advertisement that is not hidden within the content of a website. So the ad would need to be distinctively like a banner ad or a pop-up ad. If we go to the example from the discussion of a CNN news article, an ad blocker can't block that because on the computer programming side, that's just other text on the website. That's not distinctively ad. So ad blockers are effective in helping you have an ad-free internet experience, but they will not catch all native advertisements. They will not catch all hidden advertisements. So it is important to be aware of this information.
Okay, thank you, Ronan. That was from Neil. From Judy, we get, how do I get out of pop-up ads that don't have an X or delete?
So that's a really good question, and it kind of depends on the pop-up ad, and they're programmed to be difficult to get rid of. And that's inherently the problem with that type of advertising, is it's just very disruptive. And the easiest thing to do, I would say, is actually before the pop-up ad happened, you either can enable an ad blocker, which is something that came up earlier in this discussion. Ad blockers are particularly good for pop-up ads. Or you can increase your privacy settings in every browser. If you go into the internet settings, whether you like Safari or Google or Firefox or whatever you use, you can increase the privacy settings to automatically block or give you a notification about any pop-ups. And so essentially what happens is, it's not that you don't see the pop-ups because maybe you do want pop-ups. It'll just say, this website is trying to open a pop-up. Do you want to allow them to do this? Yes or no? And so this is a good option because it won't prevent you from seeing information that you need to see. But at the same token, if you know that, like, okay, I didn't try to open anything, so there shouldn't be a pop-up right now, you can, of course, click no.
Okay, thank you. From Marion, we have a question. What is a VPN?
Excellent question. No, that's a very, very important question. So the internet is organized by geography based on something called an IP address. So essentially, every single device that's connected to the internet has a unique address, just like every home in America has a unique address. And so this one, it allows the internet to exist. So that's a good thing. And that's how data gets transferred correctly. And I get my emails and you don't get my emails because they know which IP address they're going to. What's interesting is that this same IP address system is what allows this data tracking to happen. And so what a VPN does is it masks your IP address, and it can do it in one of two ways. One, it can just mask the IP address so they can't determine your geographic location. Or two, it can make your IP address look like you're somewhere else. So for example, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, but right now I live in Providence, Rhode Island. And sometimes I want to watch ice hockey games that are only available in Canada. So then I can use a VPN, not just to hide my IP address, I can use a VPN to make it look like I'm in Canada. So the IP address will look like I'm in Canada, which will then allow me to watch these Canadian hockey games that are only available in Canada. So that was a long answer. Essentially, a VPN is a service that allows you to either mask or change the appearance of your IP address, which of course would then break down this sort of data tracking that we're talking about.
What do the initials stand for?
You know what? It's actually not coming to me right now. I think it's like virtual personal network, or maybe Patrick. Yeah, you're giving me a thumbs up on that.
It stands for virtual private network.
Virtual private network. Yeah, it's also funny because like companies, you know, they co-opt these terms and then they try to make them their own. So like you might go to a website and it says virtual personal network, and then you might go to a different company's website and they call it a virtual private network because they want to like make themselves different and sell themselves in a different way. But colloquially, we sort of just call it a VPN. But yeah, the idea is that you are on the internet in a private way.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Pat. Does a VPN prevent access to your credit card info if you buy something using a VPN?
So that's a very good question. The credit card information, I don't want to make anybody nervous that they're tracking your credit card information. They can only know that if you buy something, and they're not allowed to share that information, right? So it's not like if you buy something on Facebook, then Everybody knows your credit card information. Only the company that you bought something with knows that information. And that's for a variety of reasons. That's because they need to process your payment. That's because they're required by law to have some identifying characteristic about a consumer in case there was like illegal activity or something like that. And so, no, the short answer, the VPN would not prevent the company from knowing your credit card information because you choose whether to buy the product or not. So if you buy a product on a website, you're choosing to trust that company and you're choosing to share your credit card information with that company. It does not mean that they can share it with other companies, and that has more strict regulation. What I was suggesting is if one company owns everything that you're buying, that's when it becomes tricky, because if I shop at the Disney store and I have Disney Plus and then I use a Disney website, then they can look across the credit card information because it's within the company, but they can't actually share it outside of Disney.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one last question. We're running out of time. It says, I've been getting ads in one email. When I go to unsubscribe, it just opens another web page for the same ad and never lets me go to unsubscribe.
Is that, sorry, for the person who asked that question, I just have a follow-up question to clarify.
That's
Is
Pat.
that,
Go ahead, Pat.
oh, Pat, okay, perfect. So you have an email that you're receiving that's an advertisement, or is it a pop-up?
It's an advertisement in the email, and I'm aggressive about keeping my digital footprint small. Although recently with the Computer Club and a couple of other things, I've been letting my email to be known. I don't put it in any advertising. So this is an ad that appears in my, as if I had requested information. And then when I go down to unsubscribe from that, and I've gotten probably 30 of them now.
Yeah.
This has never happened before. It's only in the last 2 weeks. It won't let me unsubscribe.
So that is a situation that goes back to these sort of unethical companies and like they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. And so the button to unsubscribe should let you unsubscribe, but essentially what it's doing is it's showing them that you're reading the email. So instead they're just sending you more email. So there is a workaround if it's not working. Generally, big companies won't do that because they don't want to piss off their customers. So like Walmart, if you click unsubscribe, it usually will unsubscribe you. Smaller companies or companies with maybe a less ethics might do something like that, but there's a workaround. Just block the recipient. That's the easiest way. So if you go into your email settings, you can create a blocked list and it just blocks any emails from certain people coming into your inbox. And so that would be the workaround in this situation. If you keep clicking unsubscribe, you're just going to get more and more and more. But if you add them to your block list, that's it. You won't get any more.
Okay.
Okay,
right.
Ronan, if you don't mind, we have one last question.
Oh yeah, I have time. I'm not in a
okay.
rush. Yeah.
One more. Is VPN and incognito the same?
So that is a good question. They're a little bit different because incognito is not, it's not actually changing your IP address. It's just Google saying, hey, we understand that sometimes you want to use the internet without being tracked. And so here is a temporary window where anything in this window on your computer won't be tracked, but the IP address is still the same. So that's kind of like VPN Junior, that essentially it creates like a temporary window where you could look at the internet safely, but once you close that window, all the data tracking is back. The VPN actually, the entire time you're using the internet, no matter how much you change websites or how many windows you open and stuff like that, everything is blocked.
Okay, thank you. Bob, I know you've added another question on how do you use a VPN, and we actually thought that might be a topic for our computer club for another meeting, to spend time on how would you use one and actually doing an example. So I hope you won't mind. So Ronan, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us. I certainly have learned a lot, and I hope the rest of the group has as well. about what to look for in when we look on a web page, and what's real advertising and what's not real advertising, as well as the 5 key things for us to do to opt out of being tracked if we choose to do so. And you've done a really excellent job of explaining to us what is good, why we should do it, and why we might not to do it. So thank you very much again for joining us, and appreciate all that you spent the time with us.